Hello, my dear friends. Imagine, just for a moment, standing on a wide stone causeway, the sun a white-hot coin in a hazy sky, and before you lies a sheet of water so vast and so perfectly rectangular that it seems to defy nature itself. This is Anchor in its prime, and its welcome is a dazzling spectacle of liquid light, of temple spires reflected in a surface so still it looks like polished silver. You've heard the stories of this place, a city of gods and kings carved from the jungle itself. But here's a little secret, whispered on the humid air. You, with your modern sensibilities and your immune system unaccustomed to the local microbes, probably wouldn't last a week here. The beauty that welcomes you is a magnificent, shimmering trap. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, find that perfect spot. Settle into your pillows and imagine the sheer, oppressive heat of the Cambodian tropics, the scent of jasmine and damp earth mingling in the air. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your first impression of the great Khmer capital is not of stone, but of water. The road you're travelling on, a raised and regal causeway, slices across a landscape dominated by it. To your side, stretching for miles, is the West Baraya man-made lake, a reservoir so enormous it feels like a natural sea. Its surface is a flawless mirror, reflecting the slow drift of cotton puff clouds and the distant, dark green line of the jungle. It's an assertion of power, a statement of control over the very elements. You can feel the intention behind it. The king didn't just build a reservoir, he commanded the world to bend to his will, creating a perfect, geometric body of water where chaotic nature once reigned. This shimmering expanse is the empire's calling card. It tells you that you are entering a realm of order, of divine mandate, a civilization so advanced it can hold the monsoon rains captive in a basin of its own design. The light bouncing off its surface is almost blinding, a pure, clean, celestial light that seems to promise purity, prosperity, and the favor of the heavens. This is the glorious illusion, the magnificent overture to the symphony of Anchor. But as you draw closer to the city proper, another sense begins to take over. It's not sight, but feeling. The air. It's not just hot, it's heavy, thick with a humidity that feels like a physical weight on your shoulders and on your chest. It's a wet, clinging heat that instantly slicks your skin with a film of sweat that will never, ever truly evaporate. The air is so saturated with moisture that you feel like you're breathing water. And with that heavy air comes a sound, a high-pitched, ubiquitous hum that you at first mistake for a trick of your own ears. It is the collective whine of a billion mosquitoes. They rise in ghostly, shimmering clouds from the banks of that beautiful, pristine-looking reservoir. They are the true, teeming residents of this hydraulic marvel. That magnificent, still body of water, so perfect for reflecting the glory of the gods, is also the world's most perfect mosquito nursery. The shocking reality behind the glistening welcome is that this entire city is built upon a fever dream. The water brings life, the rice that feeds the empire, but it also brings a constant, low-grade sickness. Dengue, malaria, and a host of other waterborne ailments are not unfortunate accidents here. They are the price of admission. They are woven into the very fabric of daily life, a constant hum beneath the chanting of monks and the proclamations of kings. So why? Why build your capital, your glorious centerpiece of civilization, in the middle of a malarial swamp? Because the power of the Khmer god king, the Devaraja, was inextricably linked to water. His legitimacy didn't come from a vote, or even from a simple line of succession. It came from his perceived ability to mediate between the earthly realm and the heavens, and the most tangible proof of that power was his control over the seasonal rains. The monsoon cycle was everything. Too little water, and the rice paddies would parch, leading to famine and rebellion. Too much, and catastrophic floods would wash everything away. To build a barrage was to domesticate the sky. It was a cosmic flex, a demonstration to the entire population that their king was so powerful, so divinely connected, that he could capture the unpredictable fury of the monsoon and transform it into a placid, life-giving lake. The shimmering, awe-inspiring view was a carefully crafted piece of political theatre. It was designed to make every visitor, every farmer, every foreign dignitary, gaze upon it and understand that they were in the presence of a man who commanded the rains. The pervasive dampness, the constant threat of fever, the swarms of insects, these were simply the backstage realities, the unpleasant but necessary costs of maintaining that grand, sun-drenched illusion of divine power. The king called this water a gift from the gods, a sacred blessing for his people. But as you'll soon see, these divine gifts often came with a hidden price, a price paid not in gold, but in the murky truth that flowed just beneath that shimmering surface. That grand illusion of control, embodied by the vast, shimmering barre, extends throughout the city in a network of smaller, yet no less significant, channels and canals. You see them everywhere, crisscrossing the landscape in a rigid grid. They are the arteries of Angkor, and the king presents them as his personal gift to the people. This is the living water, the Tuk Metha, a divine substance flowing directly from the god king's merit and power. According to the official narrative, whispered by priests and carved into temple stelae, these are not mere irrigation ditches, they are sacred conduits, extensions of the celestial realm brought down to earth. You can see how people would believe it. The main canals are wide and impressive, their banks sometimes lined with laterite or sandstone blocks. They flow past temple complexes, connecting the sacred precincts to the reservoirs, linking the divine and the mundane. A royal barge procession on one of these canals would be a sight to behold. Gilded boats shaped like mythical beasts, paddled by synchronized oarsmen, gliding on water that has been blessed and declared pure by the Devaraja himself. The water, in that moment, represents order, bounty, and the king's covenant with his people. He provides the water, and in return, they provide him with their loyalty, their labor, and their rice. It's a perfect, symbiotic relationship, a beautiful piece of political and religious poetry made manifest in engineering. This is the glamorous illusion. A city blessed with holy water, its every corner nourished by the king's divine grace flowing through these sacred, life-giving veins. But let's leave the royal procession behind and take a closer look at that sacred water. Lean over the edge of a smaller, neighborhood canal, one that runs behind a row of wooden houses built on stilts. The first thing you notice is that the water isn't really flowing. It's mostly sitting. It has a slow, languid character, a lazy patience born from the flat topography. The second thing you notice is the color. It's not clear. It's a cloudy, brownish green, an opaque liquid that hides whatever lies a few inches below the surface. And the third thing you notice, if you watch for a moment, is what's in it. A woman on the opposite bank is gutting fish, tossing the entrails into the canal with a casual flick of the wrist. A little further down, a group of children are splashing and playing, laughing as they dunk each other in the murky brew. And just beyond them, a steady trickle of something unpleasant is seeping from beneath a stilted home, likely the outlet for that household's waste. The shocking reality is that these sacred canals are the city's all-purpose utility system. They are simultaneously the source of drinking water, the laundromat, the bathing spot, the transportation highway, the fishing hole, and the public sewer. This divine gift from the king is, in fact, a murky, microbe-rich soup of bacteria, human and animal waste, parasites, and garbage. The water that irrigates the holy temple's rice fields is the same water that carries the effluent from the city's thousands of inhabitants. There is no separation. There is no concept of wastewater treatment. It is all one glorious, contaminated, sacred system. How could a civilization capable of such incredible architectural and hydraulic feats live this way? The answer lies in a profoundly different understanding of purity. For the Khmer, purity was a spiritual concept, not a biological one. The water's sacredness was conferred by ritual, by its association with the king and the gods. Priests would perform ceremonies, chanting prayers and making offerings to consecrate the canals and reservoirs. The water was blessed. Therefore, it was pure. Its physical contents were almost irrelevant. Think of it like a magical enchantment. The divine power of the king and the gods acted as a spiritual filter, neutralizing any worldly filth. They had no germ theory. They couldn't see the teeming bacteria, the wriggling amebas. Sickness, when it came, wasn't blamed on the water itself. It was blamed on a disruption of spiritual harmony, a punishment from an offended ancestor spirit, or the result of one's own bad karma. If you got sick, the fault was in your spiritual defenses, not in the king's divine water. This worldview neatly absolved the state of any responsibility for public health in the way we'd understand it today. In fact, it reinforced the king's power. The only cure for such spiritual maladies was more rituals, more devotion, more reliance on the very system that caused the problem. The canals were not a public health crisis waiting to happen. They were a constant, city-wide demonstration of the need for the king's spiritual protection. People lived, worked, and prayed alongside this murky water, their belief in its sacredness acting as a powerful shield against the unsettling evidence of their own senses. But even in a system so steeped in ritual, there were levels of purity. While the common citizen made do with this blessed, bacterial brew, the water that was to touch the body of the god king himself was an entirely different matter. Nowhere is the contrast between illusion and reality more stark than within the walls of the royal palace itself. Imagine you are granted a rare, secret glimpse into this sacred space. You are led through hushed corridors of polished wood, past walls hung with shimmering silks, into a private, open-air courtyard. In the center is a bathing pool, a sraz, smaller than the public barrets, but infinitely more exquisite. Its sides are lined with intricately carved sandstone, depicting celestial dancers or apsaras, who seem to skim the water's surface. The pool is fed by a dedicated channel, its inlet disguised as the mouth of a mythical beast. The water here is different. It is clear, almost crystalline, and the air is thick with the intoxicating scent of jasmine, champaca, and other exotic blossoms that have been crushed and scattered across the surface. This is the stage for the king's sacred bath, a daily ritual of immense political and religious importance. When the Devaraja enters this water, he is not merely getting clean. He is renewing his divine essence, purifying himself to be a worthy vessel for the gods. The act is a piece of living theatre, reinforcing his separation from the mortal realm. He bathes in perfumed, consecrated water, attended by servants who use silks instead of rough cloths, in a setting designed to evoke a heavenly paradise. This is the ultimate illusion of purity, the god-king, cleansed in a pool of liquid starlight, untouched by the grime and decay of the world outside. But every palace, no matter how divine its ruler, has a dirty secret. Plumbing. Or rather, the lack of it. While immense effort and engineering genius went into creating the king's perfect, fragrant bathing pool, a similar level of ingenuity was conspicuously absent when it came to dealing with what happened afterwards. Once the king has completed his ritual purification, once the attendants have toweled him dry with bolts of Chinese silk, what becomes of this now used, sacred but sullied water, and more to the point, what about the more mundane biological realities of the thousands of people, courtiers, priests, concubines, guards, servants who live and work within the palace complex? The shocking reality is that the palace, this heart of the empire, was a masterpiece of hydraulic inflow with almost no thought given to outflow. There were no sewer pipes, no septic systems, no hidden drainage culverts to whisk away the palace's waste. All of that effluent, from the king's bath water to the refuse from the kitchens and the latrines, was simply collected and then manually carried, in buckets and clay pots, to be unceremoniously dumped into the very same network of canals that crisscross the city. The sacred water from the king's bath, now mingled with the sweat and oils of a mortal body, would eventually rejoin the murky, microbe-rich soup that the common people used for their daily needs. The divine was, quite literally, flushed back into the mundane. This wasn't an oversight. It was a reflection of a deeply ingrained worldview. The Khmer focus was entirely on the symbolic and the sacred. The engineering prowess of the empire was directed towards accumulation and display, not disposal. Building a massive barrage to hoard the monsoon rains was a grand, visible testament to the king's power. Carving a beautiful bathing pool was a necessary stage for a vital royal ritual. These were acts of religious and political significance. Managing waste, by contrast, was a low-status, polluting, and spiritually insignificant task. It was work for the lowest rungs of society, a reality to be hidden, not engineered. The very idea of creating a permanent, stone-lined sewer system would have been unthinkable. It would be giving permanence and prestige to something that was inherently impure and transient. The palace was designed to be a microcosm of the heavens, a place of beauty and ritual. The messy, biological functions of the humans within it were a problem to be carried away by hand and forgotten, dumped back into the great, all-forgiving, all-consuming system of public canals. The illusion of the king's perfect purity was maintained by physically removing the evidence of his and his court's humanity and dissolving it into the water that sustained the very people he ruled. That water, now carrying a hint of royal perfume and a heavy dose of palace waste, would meander on, its next stop being the vast, geometric rice paddies that were the true source of the empire's fabulous wealth. From the perfumed confines of the palace, let's travel outwards, following that network of canals as they spread into the great plains surrounding the stone heart of Angkor. Here, the water's purpose becomes breathtakingly clear. It nourishes an endless, shimmering chessboard of rice paddies that stretches to the horizon. This is the true engine of the empire. The glamorous illusion presented on countless temple reliefs is one of pastoral harmony. You see carvings of serene-looking farmers tending to their fields, of fat, healthy water buffalo, and of rice stalks heavy with grain. The official story is one of divine providence. The king, through his mastery of water, has created a land of effortless abundance. The complex grid of irrigation channels fed by the Great Barriers allows for multiple rice harvests a year, a feat impossible in the unpredictable monsoon climate without this grand system. This agricultural miracle fuels the entire state. It feeds the armies that expand the empire's borders, the legions of laborers who build the temples, and the priests and royals who live in tax-supported splendor. The rice paddy, in the Khmer imagination, is a symbol of stability, wealth, and the benevolent order that the Devaraja has bestowed upon his kingdom. It's a green and pleasant land, a perfect vision of civilization taming the wild. But now, step off the raised embankment and into the paddy itself. The shocking reality begins at your ankles. The water is not cool and refreshing. It's warm, almost unpleasantly so, like bathwater that has been sitting out for hours, and it is teeming with life that you'd rather not encounter. The first thing you feel is the slick, soft mud sucking at your feet, threatening to pull you down. The second, more unsettling sensation is the tiny, persistent nibbles. This water is a thriving ecosystem for a host of parasites and invertebrates. Look closer, and you can see the water snails that carry schistosomiasis, a debilitating parasitic disease also known as snail fever. And then, there are the leeches. They are everywhere, small, dark, ribbon-like creatures that move with a silent, questing grace through the water. They attach themselves to any exposed skin with a painless bite, swelling silently as they fill with blood. The farmers who spend their lives wading through these fields are covered in small, circular scars from a lifetime of leech bites. Their feet and legs are perpetually raw, prone to fungal infections and sores that never quite heal in the damp environment. The work itself is relentless, back-breaking labor under the same oppressive sun you felt on the causeway. This is not a scene of serene, pastoral harmony. It's a daily battle against mud, sun, and a host of tiny predators, all for the sake of the rice that the king claims as a divine gift. The why behind this brutal reality is a simple and universal one: a stark class divide. The world of the farmer was utterly separate from the world of the elite in Angkor. The priest who composed the Sanskrit poem praising the king's hydraulic genius had likely never set foot in a muddy paddy. The king who claimed ownership of all land and water viewed the farmers and their labor as just another resource to be managed. No different from the water in the canals or the stone in the quarries, the well-being of the individual farmer was not a state concern. Their purpose was to produce a surplus for the state. The diseases they contracted, the leeches that bled them, the grueling nature of their work, these were simply the accepted, unchangeable conditions of their existence. It was their lot, their karma, to toil in this manner. This acceptance was reinforced by the same religious system that sanctified the water. The hardship of their lives was proof of their low spiritual status, while the king's splendor was proof of his high merit. The very system that caused their suffering was also the one that explained it away, creating a stable, if profoundly unequal, society. The surplus rice they produced, paid as tax to the king's granaries, was the foundation upon which the entire stone city was built. And the stone itself, quarried and carved by other laborers, had its own complicated relationship with the omnipresent water that defined every aspect of Khmer life. Leaving the sweltering, leech-filled paddies, you are drawn back towards the heart of the city, towards the silent, magnificent presence of the temples. As you approach a monument like Angkor Wat or the Bayon, the sheer scale and permanence of it is overwhelming. The stone towers, shaped like lotus buds, rise towards the sky, their surfaces covered in a breathtaking tapestry of carvings. You see gods and demons, epic battles, and processions of kings. The stone itself seems to speak of eternity. It looks solid, impermeable, and everlasting. This is the glamorous illusion of Khmer architecture, a city of stone built to last for all time, a physical manifestation of the unchanging cosmic order. The intricacy of the carvings, the precision of the construction, the sheer weight of the millions of sandstone blocks, it all communicates a mastery over the material world. You run your hand over a bas-relief of an apsara, and the stone feels cool and strong beneath your fingers. This is a place where human ambition has triumphed over the transient chaos of the jungle, creating a monument that feels as permanent as a mountain range. It is the ultimate symbol of a civilization that has conquered its environment. But look closer at that stone. Notice the patches of darkness, the streaks of green and black that mar the golden hue of the sandstone. Touch it again, not on a sun-drenched outer wall, but in a shady, secluded gallery. It no longer feels cool and dry. It feels damp, almost clammy, with a slick, slightly greasy texture. If you press your ear against the wall in a quiet corner, you can almost hear a faint, deep sigh. The stone is breathing. And it is breathing water. The shocking reality behind the eternal city of stone is that it is slowly, constantly being digested by the very humidity it was built to defy. The primary building material, sandstone, is incredibly porous. It acts like a sponge. During the long, wet monsoon season, the stones soak up the torrential rain, drawing moisture deep into their core. Then, during the hot, dry season, that moisture begins to evaporate, wicking its way back to the surface. This endless cycle of saturation and evaporation is a relentless engine of decay. It fosters the growth of mold, lichen, and algae that feast on the stone's mineral components, their microscopic tendrils breaking down the cohesive bonds of the rock. The process is slow but inexorable. The stone weeps with moisture, creating a microclimate of perpetual dampness within the temple galleries. The air inside, even on the hottest days, is heavy with the musty, subterranean smell of wet rock and slow decay smell of a cave, not a palace of the gods. This constant battle with dampness was simply an accepted fact of life, an unsolvable problem for Khmer engineers. Their genius was in hydrology and civil engineering on a massive scale, moving and managing water, not in micro details like damp proofing. The choice of sandstone was one of practicality. It was the most readily available material that was suitable for their incredibly detailed carvings. The harder, more durable later it was used for foundations and hidden structural elements, but it was too coarse for the delicate artistry that the temples required. So they chose sandstone. Knowing its flaws, their worldview likely didn't see this as a failure. Just as they accepted the sicknesses that came from the canals, they accepted the mold that grew on their sacred walls. The universe was a cycle of creation and destruction, and the temples were not immune to this cosmic law. The constant need for maintenance, for scrubbing away the biological growth, for replacing a crumbling block was part of the temple's life cycle. It was an ongoing act of devotion. A temple wasn't a static object to be built and then left alone. It was a living entity that required constant care and attention to hold the forces of decay at bay. The stone's tendency to absorb and weep water was just another aspect of the powerful, omnipresent element they sought to control. It was a constant reminder that even their most enduring creations were still subject to the slow, relentless power of water, a power most visible in the great, engineered lakes that were the city's heart. Your gaze is drawn back to where our journey began, to the immense, man-made seas known as the Barrays. From a distance, or viewed from the upper terrace of a temple, they are objects of sublime beauty and geometric perfection. The West Barray, for instance, is a rectangle of water measuring nearly 5 miles long by 1.5 miles wide. Its scale is almost impossible to comprehend. It holds millions upon millions of gallons of water, a reserve captured during the monsoon to be carefully rationed out during the 6-month dry season. This is the glamorous illusion of the Barray, a triumph of engineering, a testament to foresight, and a symbol of the king's power to provide for his people. The Barrays are the linchpin of the entire hydraulic system. They are the great capacitors, storing the raw energy of the monsoon. From them, a complex and sophisticated system of canals and sluice gates directs water to the fields and the city with gravitational precision. Standing on its manicured earthen embankment, looking out over that vast, placid surface, you feel a sense of profound order and security. This isn't just a reservoir, it's a promise. A guarantee that even when the skies are brassy and the land is parched, the life-giving water will still flow. It is the very image of serene, managed abundance. Now, let's imagine you could peer beneath that placid surface. The shocking reality is that the Barrays were not the clear, clean systems we might imagine. They were vast, shallow, and almost entirely stagnant. With an average depth of only a few feet, the sun would warm the water through, creating a perfect incubator. The inflow only happened during the few months of the monsoon, and the outflow, through the irrigation canals, was a slow, steady drain. For most of the year, the water barely moved. This stagnation turned these magnificent engineering works into enormous petri dishes. The bottom of the Barray would have been a thick, anaerobic sludge of decomposing organic matter, leaves, algae, animal waste, and anything else that washed into it. This sludge would release gases that bubbled to the surface, carrying the unmistakable rotten egg smell of hydrogen sulfide. And as we discovered at the very beginning of our journey, this still, warm water was the ideal breeding ground for mosquitoes, carrying malaria and dengue fever, and the water snails that hosted parasitic flukes. The Barrays were, in essence, gigantic, beautifully sculpted swamps. While they solved the problem of water quantity, they created a massive problem of water quality. Why build them this way? Why not make them deeper, or create systems to aerate them? The Khmer engineers were masters of civil engineering, but their knowledge was empirical, based on generations of observation, not on modern scientific theory. They knew how to move water from point A to point B, They understood topography and gravity with incredible precision, but the unseen world of microbiology was completely unknown to them. They were solving the single, overwhelming problem that defined their existence: how to survive the dry season. The barrays were a brilliantly effective solution to that specific problem. The associated health problems were simply not connected to the water in their minds. As we've seen, disease was a matter of spiritual imbalance, not contaminated water sources. Furthermore, the sheer scale of the barrays made any other design impractical. Digging these massive reservoirs deeper with the manual labor available would have been an almost impossible task. A shallow, wide design maximized the surface area to capture rainfall and was far easier to construct using the available technology of baskets, scoops, and immense manpower. The barrays were a pragmatic solution, a massive trade-off. They traded public health for agricultural security. This vast, stagnant, disease-ridden body of water was the price the empire had to pay for its existence. And in a society so attuned to the challenges of the physical world, the elites developed their own methods for coping with the pervasive dampness and decay, creating an olfactory world just as illusory as the visual one. Let's step back inside, away from the grand public works and into the private spaces of Anka's elite. Imagine you are invited into the wooden residence of a high-ranking court official. The house itself is an elegant structure on stilts, its polished teak floors gleaming. Intricate carvings adorn the door frames and window shutters. It is a home designed for the tropics, with open galleries and breezeways intended to capture any hint of a breeze. The glamorous illusion here is one of sophisticated comfort. The air should be fresh, filled with the scent of the surrounding gardens and the faint, clean smell of wood and silk. This is the life of the privileged, a world of refined aesthetics, shielded from the harsh realities of the climate. Servants move silently in the background, offering cool drinks. The atmosphere is meant to be one of calm, uncluttered elegance, a civilized oasis in the midst of the humid jungle. You expect to breathe an air of rarefied purity, befitting a powerful minister of the god king. But as you settle onto a silk cushion, you become aware of a subtle, underlying scent that the open architecture cannot entirely dispel. It's that smell we encountered in the temple galleries, the persistent, musty odor of dampness, of mildew, of things that are never truly dry. Remember the weeping sandstone and the perpetually saturated air. These wooden houses, while more breathable than stone, were just as susceptible. The constant humidity would have permeated everything: the silk wall hangings, the woven grass mats on the floor, the ceremonial robes folded in chests, even the palm leaf manuscripts in the library. Nothing was ever fully dry. This low-key, pervasive scent of decay and mold was the inescapable olfactory background noise of life in Anka. The shocking reality is that the elegant homes of the elite were in a constant state of quiet, fragrant rot. It was a smell that hinted at the impermanence of all things, a direct contradiction of the eternal image the empire sought to project. So how did they combat this? Not with ventilation, which was already maxed out, but with a form of aromatic warfare. The solution was to mask the scent of decay with an overwhelming cloud of perfume. This is the why. The air in this official's home is thick with competing, powerful fragrances. A bronze censer in the corner smolders with aromatic eaglewood or agar wood, its rich, resinous smoke curling towards the ceiling. Clay bowls filled with water hold floating jasmine and champaca blossoms, their sweet perfume blooming in the humid air. The minister himself is a walking source of fragrance. His silks have been stored with fragrant benzoin resins, and a thick, perfumed wax has been applied to his skin and hair. This wasn't just about personal adornment. It was a matter of creating an environment. It was an attempt to build an olfactory fortress, to create an illusion of purity and freshness by layering powerful, pleasant smells on top of these unpleasant ones. In a world without germ theory, bad smells are miasmas are believed to be the direct cause of disease. The scent of mold and mildew wasn't just unpleasant. It was considered dangerous, a sign of corrupt and unhealthy air. Therefore, surrounding oneself with powerful, pure fragrances was seen as a form of medicinal protection. It was a way to purify the very air you breathed. The use of perfume was not a luxury, it was a necessity, a vital tool for maintaining both the illusion of a pristine environment and one's own physical health. This fragrant shield was yet another layer of the sophisticated system of belief that separated the beautiful illusion from the damp reality, a system guarded over by powerful symbols, like the mythical serpents who were said to protect the waters themselves. As you move through the city, you begin to notice a recurring motif, a powerful and ubiquitous symbol carved into the very fabric of Anka. You see it on the balustrades of the causeways, rearing up as if to greet you. You see it framing the sacred pools and decorating the lintels of temple doorways. It is the Naga, the mythical, multi-headed serpent deity. The glamorous illusion presented by these magnificent sculptures is one of divine protection. The Naga is a water spirit, a guardian of the underworld and the treasures it contains. In Khmer cosmology, Nagas are the bridge between the human world and the realm of the gods, their bodies forming the rainbow. By placing them as guardians of the causeways and reservoirs, the Khmer were making a powerful statement. These sacred waters are protected. They are watched over by a powerful, semi-divine being who ensures their purity and benevolent power. When you cross a bridge lined with stone Nagas, you are meant to feel that you are passing through a protected, sanctified space. The serpents are a promise from the king that the water he provides is safe, blessed, and divinely ensured against any harm. They are the ultimate seal of quality on the kingdom's most precious resource. But take a walk along the embankment of one of the city's canals, a smaller one that flows through a densely populated area. The stone Naga at the main sluice gate rears its hooded heads with imperious dignity, a silent, stony guardian. A few hundred yards downstream from this divine protector, however, the scene is one of casual contamination. You see a tanner washing animal hides in the water, the runoff turning the canal a milky, chemical brown. Next to him, a woman is washing her cooking pots, scraping out the burnt remains of the day's meal. Further on, the bloated carcass of a stray dog has become snagged on a tangle of roots, gently bobbing in the slow current. The shocking reality is that for all their symbolic power, the stone Nagas were utterly helpless against the real-world pollution of the water supply. They could guard the water in a spiritual sense, but they couldn't stop a single person from using the canal as a drain or a garbage dump. The divine protection they offered was purely metaphysical. They could ward off evil spirits, perhaps, but they were powerless against bacteria, chemical waste and biological contaminants. The promise of purity was a myth, a story told in stone, while the liquid reality flowing past those stones grew more polluted with every yard it travelled from the reservoir. So why did the people continue to revere the Naga and believe in its protective power, even when the evidence of their senses told them the water was far from pure? The answer lies in the separation of the physical and spiritual worlds. The Naga's job was not to ensure the water was potable in a modern, scientific sense. Its role was to maintain the water's spiritual and symbolic integrity. The Naga was a guarantee that the water was ritually pure, that it was still connected to the divine source, and that it was fit for use in sacred duties like irrigating the temple's rice fields. The physical filth was a separate, worldly matter. The Khmer worldview was able to hold two contradictory ideas at once. The water is spiritually pure, because the Naga protects it, and the water is physically dirty because that is the nature of the world. The contamination was not seen as a failure of the Naga, but as a consequence of human action in the mundane sphere. This belief system was incredibly resilient. If someone got sick, it wasn't because the Naga had failed, it was because the person's own spiritual defenses were weak or because they had offended some other local spirit. The Naga's reputation remained intact. This powerful symbol, carved in stone all over the city, served to constantly reinforce the official narrative, reminding people to trust in the spiritual protection of the king's system rather than the disconcerting evidence of their own eyes and noses. It was a brilliant way to maintain public confidence in a system whose foundational resource was also its greatest potential liability, a resource whose control was the ultimate expression of the king's power. Surveying the entire landscape of Angkor from a high temple terrace, you can see how the lines of the canals and the vast rectangles of the barrays impose a geometric order on the jungle. This network is not just for agriculture, it is the physical manifestation of the king's political power. The glamorous illusion is one of divine benevolence. The inscriptions on the temple walls tell you that the king is a compassionate father to his people, the master of the water. He has built these incredible works out of a selfless desire to ensure his subjects never suffer from drought or famine. The system is portrayed as a gift, a cosmic act of charity. The king, as the earthly counterpart of Indra, the god of rain, generously bestows the life-giving water upon the land. The canals are arteries of grace, and the reservoirs are bottomless cups of divine mercy. This narrative presents the king as a servant to his people's needs, a pious ruler whose greatest ambition is to see his kingdom flourish in peace and prosperity. It is a powerful and comforting image, the all-powerful king as the all-providing father. But let's trace the flow of that power. Not just the flow of the water. The shocking reality is that this system of benevolence was also a system of absolute control. The water in the barrays and canals didn't belong to the people, it belonged to the king. He and the temple priests and officials who worked for him controlled the sluice gates. They decided which fields received water, when they received it, and how much they received. This control over water was the ultimate political weapon in a society based on rice agriculture. A farmer or a village that was loyal and paid its taxes on time would find their irrigation channels flowing freely, but a village that was rebellious, that questioned the king's authority, or that was slow to provide its quota of rice or labor, would find its sluice gate shut. The water would be cut off. In the blistering heat of the dry season, a field without water is a death sentence. The rice withers, the harvest fails, and starvation looms. The king didn't need to send armies to crush every minor dissent. He could simply turn off the tap. Thirst was a far more effective and insidious tool of coercion than the sword. This reality was not seen as tyranny. It was simply the logical extension of the king's divine status. The wise rooted in the concept of ownership. The Devaraja did not just rule the land, he was the land. In Khmer cosmology, the kingdom was a physical extension of the king's own body, and the water was its lifeblood. Therefore, he had the absolute right to direct that lifeblood as he saw fit. Providing water was an act of grace, but it was not an obligation. Withholding it was not cruelty, it was a legitimate response to a part of his body that was malfunctioning or diseased. The system was designed to create a state of total dependence. Every farmer, looking at his thirsty fields, knew that his survival and the survival of his family depended entirely on the goodwill of a distant king and his local officials. This fostered a climate of compliance and obedience far more effectively than any police force. The grand hydraulic system, presented as a gift, was in fact a leash. It tethered the entire population to the whims of the central authority. Every drop of water that flowed into a rice paddy was a reminder of who was truly in charge. This delicate balance of power, however, was itself dependent on the one force the kings could influence, but never truly control: the monsoon. You are standing on the wide, earthen embankment of the eastern Barre as the sky begins to change. For months, the sun has been a relentless, punishing force. The air has been dry, the land dusty and cracked, but now, a shift is coming. The horizon darkens to a bruised purple, and the wind, for the first time in ages, carries a cool, damp scent. The glamorous illusion of the Khmer water system is that it has tamed the monsoon. The engineers have anticipated this moment all year. The barrays are low, the canals are thirsty, and the entire system is primed and ready to receive the coming deluge. The arrival of the monsoon is a moment of celebration, a sign that the cosmic cycle is turning, that the gods are pleased, and that the king's power to mediate with the heavens is once again affirmed. The system is designed to capture this wild, chaotic energy and domesticate it, funneling the floodwaters into the placid, orderly geometry of the reservoirs and canals. It is a vision of perfect foresight and control, a civilization in complete harmony with the most powerful climatic force in its world. Then the sky breaks open. This isn't rain as you know it. It is a solid wall of water, a deafening, vertical flood that instantly turns the dusty ground to mud. The wind howls, tearing at the thatched roofs of nearby houses and whipping the surface of the Barre into a frenzy of white-capped waves. The shocking reality is that for all their brilliance, the Khmer engineers lived on a knife's edge. Their system was designed to handle a typical monsoon, but the monsoon is not always typical. A particularly violent storm, or a series of them, could push the system beyond its limits. The sheer volume of water cascading from the sky could overwhelm the inlets, eroding the great earthen dams that held the barrays in check. A breach in a barray wall would be an unimaginable catastrophe. It would not be a gentle leak, it would be the instantaneous, explosive release of billions of gallons of water, a tidal wave of mud and fury that would obliterate everything in its path: villages, rice paddies, roads and people. Even a lesser failure, like a collapsed canal wall or a broken sluice gate, could cause massive, uncontrolled flooding, drowning the very fields the system was meant to protect. So why build a system so vulnerable to the very force it was meant to control? Because there was no other choice. The entire existence of the Angkorian civilization was predicated on solving the problem of the monsoon's dual nature: too much water for half the year, not enough for the other half. The barrays and canals were the only possible solution. They had to be big enough to store enough water for the dry season, which in turn meant they were large and potentially dangerous during the wet season. The Khmer lived with a level of risk that is almost unimaginable to us. They were engaged in a high-stakes gamble with the climate every single year. The why is a philosophy of resilience, not prevention. They couldn't stop a catastrophic storm, so they focused on being able to repair the damage when it happened. The state maintained vast teams of labourers, not just for building new temples, but for the constant year-round work of dredging canals, reinforcing embankments and repairing storm damage. Their world was not a static, perfectly controlled machine. It was a dynamic, living system that was constantly being broken and repaired. It was a testament to their incredible social organization and their fatalistic acceptance of nature's power. This constant cycle of damage and repair, of sickness and attempted cures, was mirrored in their approach to medicine, where the problems caused by water were often treated with more water. Let's follow one of the canals to a unique and surprising location on the outskirts of the main temple city. You arrive at a complex that looks, at first glance, like another temple. It has the same laterite walls, the same sandstone carvings, and a central sanctuary. But the bas-reliefs here don't depict epic battles or divine kings. They show rows of seated figures, some looking emaciated, others with swollen limbs. This is one of the Aragaya Sala, a royal hospital built by the great King Jayavarman. The glamorous illusion is one of enlightened, compassionate care. The king, in his infinite mercy, has not only provided his people with water for their fields, but also with places of healing for their bodies. Priests and healers, trained in traditional Khmer and Ayurvedic medicine, attend to the sick. The air is meant to be one of quiet contemplation and recovery, a sanctuary where the king's grace extends to the infirm. Inscriptions tell us that the king suffered more from the illnesses of his subjects than from his own, a beautiful sentiment suggesting a state-sponsored healthcare system that was centuries ahead of its time. But let's step inside and observe the treatments. A man suffering from a burning fever and dysentery, classic symptoms of a waterborne disease like cholera or typhoid, likely contracted from a contaminated canal, is brought before a healer. The shocking reality is that the prescribed cure will almost certainly involve more water from the very same system that made him sick. The healer doesn't make the connection between the murky canal water and the man's illness. Instead, his diagnosis is spiritual. The man has a humoral imbalance, or has been afflicted by a malevolent spirit. The treatment is therefore ritualistic. The patient is given lustral water to drink, water that has been sanctified by being poured over a sacred statue or linga and collected in a basin. This water, drawn from a nearby pool or canal, is believed to be imbued with divine healing power that will purge the sickness from the man's body. He may also be prescribed a ritual bath in one of the hospital's own sacred pool pools fed by the same general water supply. The well-intentioned cure, in a terrifying number of cases, would have simply been a larger dose of the original poison. The why behind this seemingly counterintuitive practice is, once again, the complete disconnect between spiritual purity and biological reality. In the Khmer worldview, disease was a spiritual problem requiring a spiritual solution. The physical properties of the water were irrelevant. Its ritual history was everything. Water that had touched a divine icon was, by definition, a powerful medicine. The idea that this sacred liquid could also carry invisible agents of disease would have been nonsensical. This approach was not born of ignorance or stupidity. It was the logical application of their deeply held beliefs. The hospitals, the Aragaya Sala, were primarily spiritual institutions, not medical ones in our modern sense. Their function was to restore the patient's harmony with the cosmic order through prayers, offerings, and rituals. The healers were priests as much as they were physicians. They were fighting a spiritual battle, and their primary weapon was ritually purified water. This system provided immense comfort and psychological solace to the sick, but its physical effectiveness for bacteriological illnesses would have been minimal or even negative. The entire magnificent system, from the hospitals that treated the sick to the canals that watered the rice, was credited to the vision of the kings, but its actual construction and maintenance rested on the shoulders of a vast, forgotten army of workers. The official history of Angkor, the one you read carved in Sanskrit on the temple stele, is a history of kings and gods. It is King Indravarman I who is credited with building the first great barrage. It is Jayavarman VA who is celebrated for the network of hospitals and roads. The glamorous illusion is that these monumental works sprang into existence through the sheer will of the Devaraja. The king had a divine vision, and the temples and reservoirs simply manifested, as if by magic. The narrative is one of a top-down creation, where a single, brilliant, divinely inspired mind conceived of the entire system. The bas-reliefs show kings giving orders, and the inscriptions record their glorious achievements for posterity. The workers, the engineers, the laborers, they are almost entirely absent from the official record. They are the invisible ink in the grand story of Angkor, their contributions erased in favor of a simpler, more potent myth of the god king as the sole creator. Now, let's leave the stone temples and venture to the places where the real work was done. Picture a vast construction site, the digging of a new canal, miles long under the searing tropical sun. The shocking reality is a panorama of human toil on an almost unimaginable scale. There are no bulldozers, no excavators, no power tools. There are only thousands upon thousands of human bodies. Men, women, and likely children, organized into vast teams, are digging the heavy, clay-rich earth with simple iron-tipped spades and bamboo shovels. They fill woven baskets with the soil, which are then passed from hand to hand up the growing embankment, or carried on yokes across straining shoulders. The air is filled with the rhythmic chant of foremen, the grunts of exertion, and the buzzing of flies drawn to the sweat that coats every worker. The mud is thick and clinging, and the work is relentless, from sunrise to sunset. Accidents are common: a collapsing trench wall, a slipped footing, a case of heat stroke. For those digging in the water-logged sections, the same leeches and parasites that plague the farmers are a constant affliction. These are the people who actually built the hydraulic empire, the silent engineers and labourers whose names are lost to history. They were likely conscripted, part of the system of taxes paid not in rice, but in physical labour for the state's projects. Their lives were brutally hard, and their reward was not a place in the historical record, but simply survival. The why behind their historical invisibility is central to the concept of the God-King. To credit the labourers would be to dilute the king's divine power. The entire political and religious system was built on the premise that the king was the sole source of the kingdom's prosperity and grand works. Admitting that he relied on the sweat and toil of hundreds of thousands of ordinary people would have undermined that essential myth. The king was the mind, the people were merely the muscle, an expendable resource to be used as he saw fit. This worldview is reflected in the very structure of their society. There was a vast chasm between the literate, Sanskrit-writing elite who created the official records and the illiterate, Khmer-speaking masses who did the physical work. The elites wrote about what was important to them: theology, royal genealogy, and the king's merit. The daily life of a labourer was not considered a subject worthy of being carved into eternal stone. Their existence was as transient as the wooden houses they lived in, a stark contrast to the stone temples they built for their king. And it was these wooden houses, not the stone temples, that made up the vast majority of this incredible city. When you think of Angkor, the image that comes to mind is almost certainly one of stone. You picture the iconic 5 towers of Angkor Wat, the serene stone faces of the Bayon, the jungle-choked ruins of Taprom. The glamorous illusion, perpetuated by centuries of archaeology and photography, is that Angkor was a city of stone temples. We see the remains of these sacred structures and assume they were the city's core, the grand and permanent heart of a civilization defined by its masonry. We imagine kings and priests living within these stone walls, their lives playing out in cool, carved galleries. The very term lost city conjures images of stone buildings swallowed by jungle, a silent, monumental ghost town waiting to be rediscovered. This vision of Angkor as a stone metropolis is powerful, romantic, and deeply ingrained in our collective imagination. But now, let's pull back, using our mind's eye to fly high above the temple complexes. The shocking reality is that Angkor was not a city of stone at all. It was a city of wood, and the stone temples were merely the sacred islands in a vast, sprawling sea of wooden houses, shops, and administrative buildings. For every one stone temple, there were thousands of wooden structures that have long since vanished, devoured by the jungle, the humidity, and the termites. The population of Angkor at its height may have approached 1 million people, making it the most extensive urban complex in the pre-industrial world. And all of those people lived in wooden houses built on stilts, nestled along the banks of the canals and reservoirs. The real city was a low-rise, organic, and highly flammable metropolis, utterly defined by its relationship with the water grid. The stone structures were the exception, not the rule. They were the religious and ceremonial centres, but the life of the city, the commerce, the crafts, the family life, the governance seal happened in wood. The city we see today is a skeleton. The flesh and blood have long since rotted away. The why behind this ghost city of wood is both practical and deeply philosophical. Practically, building with wood was faster, cheaper, and better suited to the climate. Wooden houses on stilts allowed breezes to circulate underneath, providing natural air conditioning and a degree of protection from floods and ground-level pests. But the philosophical reason is even more significant. Stone was the material of the gods. It was reserved for the sacred structures intended to last for eternity, the temples that were the homes of the deities, and the reservoirs that were their cosmic symbols. Humans, even the king himself, were mortal and transient. It would have been an act of profound hubris to build a private home out of the same eternal material as a god's house. Your life was fleeting. So your home should be too. This worldview created a cityscape that was a direct reflection of their cosmology. A few permanent, sacred stone islands for the gods, surrounded by a vast, perishable sea of wooden homes for mortals. The entire sprawling, water-laced city, a marvel of organization and engineering, was a fragile masterpiece. Its complexity was its strength, but as the centuries wore on, that very same complexity would become its greatest vulnerability, leading to a long, slow decline that had less to do with invading armies and more to do with the water itself. The story of Angkor's downfall is often told as a dramatic, sudden event. The glamorous illusion, popularized by early explorers and romantic histories, is that of a powerful kingdom sacked and abandoned after a decisive defeat. The common narrative points to the invasions by the neighboring Siamese kingdom of Ayutthaya in the 14th and 15th centuries. In this version of the story, the city is looted, the elites are carried off, and the magnificent capital is left empty, to be swiftly swallowed by the jungle. It's a tale of war and conquest, a classic rise and fall narrative where the end is as spectacular as the beginning. This story provides a neat, easily understandable reason for the abandonment of such a great city, a dramatic final chapter for a powerful empire, but the reality, as revealed by modern climate science and archaeology, is far more complex and, in a way, more tragic. The shocking truth is that Angkor was not killed by an invading army. It died a slow, thirsty, and then waterlogged death. The complex water management system, which was the very source of its power, became its fatal flaw. For centuries, the Khmer thrived during a period of stable and predictable climate, a medieval climate anomaly characterized by consistently strong monsoons. Their entire system was calibrated to this specific pattern. But starting in the mid-14th century, the climate began to change. Tree-ring data from Southeast Asia shows a period of prolonged and extreme weather volatility. Decades-long mega-droughts, far more severe than anything the system was designed for, were followed by incredibly intense monsoons. During the droughts, the Great Barrays would have run dangerously low or even dry, unable to supply the vast network of canals. The multiple rice harvests would have failed, leading to widespread famine and social unrest. Then, the subsequent mega-monsoons would have unleashed furious floods, overwhelming the parched and cracked earthen infrastructure. The violent deluges would have torn through the system, breaking embankments, silting up the canals with debris and causing catastrophic damage that the state, weakened by drought and famine, no longer had the resources or the manpower to effectively repair. The why of the collapse is that the system was too successful, too specialized, and too rigid. It was a masterpiece of engineering optimized for a single set of climatic conditions. When those conditions changed, the system's strengths became its weaknesses. It was too big and too interconnected to adapt. A failure in one part of the network would cascade through the rest. A silted-up main canal couldn't be easily bypassed. A breached barrage couldn't be quickly rebuilt, especially with a starving and depleted workforce. The Siamese invasions were not the cause of the decline, they were a symptom of it. They were kicking a door that was already rotten. The kings and the elite, seeing their hydraulic power base literally crumbling around them, began to relocate south to areas with more reliable rainfall that didn't require such a massive and fragile infrastructure. The fall of Angkor wasn't a sudden event. It was a slow, painful process of system failure, a decades-long crisis, where the very water that had given the city life became the agent of its destruction. The people didn't vanish overnight. They slowly drifted away, seeking survival elsewhere, leaving the stone temples and the broken canals behind. The jungle moved back in, but it couldn't erase everything. The true legacy of Angkor was not left in its stone, but etched into the very earth itself. As the great wooden city rots away and the population dwindles, the jungle begins its patient, inexorable reclamation. For centuries, the image of this final stage is one of romantic decay. The glamorous illusion is that of a lost city, a mysterious place swallowed whole by nature. We picture massive tree roots strangling the temples, green moss blanketing the serene faces of the gods, and silence descending upon the once bustling causeways. It's a vision of nature's triumph over human ambition, a beautiful and melancholic scene where the works of man are returned to the earth. In this story, the jungle is the victor, a green tide that washes over the ruins, erasing the memory of the civilization that once stood here. The stone temples become enigmatic puzzles, their original purpose and context obscured by the riot of vegetation. The focus remains on the stone, the last lonely sentinels of a forgotten kingdom. But if you were to look at this landscape today, not with your eyes on the ground but with modern technology from the sky, you would see a very different and far more shocking reality. Using satellite imagery and ground-penetrating radar, archaeologists have discovered that the jungle did not erase Angkor at all. In fact, it preserved it. The true city, the vast hydraulic network and the grid of now vanished wooden houses, is still there. Its ghost is imprinted on the landscape. The shocking reality is that the outlines of the ancient canals, the raised mounds where houses once stood, and the geometric patterns of the rice paddies are still visible, etched into the soil. The jungle grew over and around these features, and the subtle variations in vegetation and elevation have perfectly preserved the city's blueprint. The forest floor is not a random wilderness, it is an archaeological map of one of the world's most extensive pre-industrial cities. The real wonder of Angkor isn't the stone temples, but this vast, waterlogged urban footprint hiding in plain sight. The why of this incredible preservation is a final, beautiful irony. The very water management system that defined the city in life is what defines it in death. The canals, dikes and reservoirs so profoundly altered the topography and hydrology of the land that their influence persists even now, a millennium later. The soil in an ancient canal bed is different from the soil 3 feet away, and so it supports slightly different vegetation. The raised earth of a long-gone house mound drains differently than the surrounding land. This immense hydraulic machine was so powerful that it permanently sculpted the earth. The jungle didn't conquer Angkor, it simply moved in and adapted to the contours that the Khmer had created. The greatest monument the Khmer left behind was not Angkor Wat, but the engineered landscape itself. Their true legacy is not written in stone, but in the mud, in the subtle, water-shaped patterns that reveal the breathtaking scale and complexity of their world. It's a silent, sprawling testament to a civilization that rose and fell on the power of water,